Welcome back, Pack. Before we dive into the next chapter of this incredible story, let me quickly set the scene for any newcomers and remind our loyal subscribers what led us to this moment. Alpha Alistair Vance, the North's most formidable leader, was brought to his knees not by an enemy army, but by the ceaseless cries of his 6-week-old heir, Arthur. For 3 unending hours, the marble halls of Ashworth Manor echoed with his son's raw grief, a sound that haunted the Alpha since the loss of his Luna. The entire court, from healers to warriors, failed to bring the pup peace. But then, from the shadows of the servants' crowd, an unlikely figure emerged, a poor kitchen omega named Eliza. With a soft voice and a forbidden lullaby, she accomplished the impossible, silencing the heir's cries and laying bare the Alpha's hidden grief. Alistair's world cracked open, not from battle, but from a single, fearless act of tenderness. Now, the question remains, can a bond forged in desperation survive the rigid laws of rank and the whispers of a vengeful court? You won't believe what happens next, so make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. Let's get into it. The Conqueror's bellow rattled the silver sconces. 3 hours. 3 devastating hours of his son's wailing had ricocheted through the polished stone manor. Soldiers flinched. Maids wept quietly. Even the night's moon seemed to shield its face behind a cloak of heavy clouds. And then, a sound entirely unexpected. Soft, stockinged footsteps. A meager Omega girl separated herself from the clustered servants, her hands tight, her eyes wide with an emotion that was part recklessness, part faith. "Stop her," the beta barked, but before the elite guards could move, she murmured, "Allow me a chance." The great hall fell into absolute quiet. Alpha Alistair Vance, who had commanded thousands of warriors and shattered ancient rivals, could only watch as the girl drifted across the immense chamber toward him. Her simple scent was of spice and hearth smoke, a fragile aroma that didn't plead for mercy, but dared judgment. Without waiting for his word, she gently took the inconsolable pup from his iron grip. A horrified gasp shuddered through the court, a wave of fear and shock. She held the child close to her chest and began to hum a tune, a low, rhythmic lullaby, primal, lunar, and dangerously old. In a few precious seconds, the desperate cries stuttered. The pup's tiny fists uncurled, his ragged breathing smoothed out. Then utter silence. The entire castle paused. Alistair's chest rose and fell heavily, the burdens of command utterly forgotten. The Omega lifted her tear-filled gaze to meet his, her expression raw but resolute. "He was not sick, Alpha," she whispered. "He was lonely. He sensed your pain." Just like that, the most powerful Alpha in the Northern Territories felt his foundation crumble. His undoing came not from a hostile blade, but from simple compassion. For the first time in his formidable reign, the Alpha of Ashworth bowed his head. The cry tore through the midnight air like a splinter of ice. It wasn't the sweet, innocent whimpering of a newborn. It was a tempest, raw and fierce, echoing through the cold, granite bones of Ashworth Keep until the flames in the standing torches flickered in sympathy. Staff scurried like frightened ghosts through the passageways, offering warm milk, fresh linens, and fearful prayers. Yet every effort failed. The Alpha's heir, barely 6 weeks old, wept as if the very world had betrayed him. Alpha Alistair Vance stood in the heart of the frantic chaos, his hands balled into painful fists, his eyes twin shards of dark, hardened steel. His breathing was shallow and harsh, each inhale scraping against the impenetrable barrier of pride that had always served as his shield. For 3 unrelenting hours, the agonizing sound had assaulted his control, eroding the last vestiges of his patience. "Try a different approach," he commanded, his voice low and vibrating with barely contained fury. "Yes, Alpha," the senior nursemaid whispered, her hands trembling as she took the air. She swayed gently, attempting soft songs, her scent thick with raw terror, but the baby only shrieked louder, as if rejecting the entire realm that contained him. By the time the full moon reached its zenith, the massive halls of Ashworth had settled into a state of stunned exhaustion. The guards in the flanking corridors stood rigid, their heads slightly bowed, careful not to even breathe too loud. Even the Beta commander dared not break the silence. He should be unbreakable, Alistair thought, the bitterness a tight knot in his throat, as he glared at the luxurious cradle that refused to hold rest. My son, my successor, my lineage. But the infant's screams cut deeper. Each agonizing howl sounded too much like finality, too much like her. Luna Victoria's name throbbed in his core like a gaping wound. She had perished bringing this child into his world, her final words a soft plea for forgiveness. Since that day, every cry from his son felt like a spectral echo calling out his failures. He had conquered armies, ripped apart rival territories, and stood victorious over the ruins of kingdoms. But here, within the sanctity of his own nursery, the Alpha of the North was utterly powerless. Servants huddled near the door, whispering. Perhaps it is a blight, one muttered, noting the Luna's blood had been spilled under the rare crimson moon. Another quickly shushed her, but the seed of blight had already reached Alistair's keen ears. He turned slowly, eyes narrowed. Who spoke that word? The air grew heavy and cold. Silence. Speak. His roar tore through the room, causing the grand chandeliers to swing violently. The child screamed with renewed force, the sound threatening to splinter the ancient stone. For one fleeting moment, the Alpha's face twisted with something far deeper than rage, something akin to dread. Why can't I stop this? The nursemaid sank to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. Alpha, perhaps he perceived something. Perhaps enough. Alistair's tone was a razor's edge. Leave. One by one, the staff fled the chamber, leaving him alone with the tormented child and the stark evidence of his failure. As a chilling quiet settled, broken only by the baby's weak, ragged cries, Alistair moved closer. He paused before the cradle, his enormous hands hovering above, uncertain how to handle something so fragile. Those hands could shatter bone. They could command legions, but not this. Not this small, weeping life. Hush, he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking for the first time in years. Please, just hush. The pup's tiny hand reached out, brushing the tassel of his velvet cloak. For a heartbeat, the Alpha froze, startled by the brief warmth, the frail, desperate touch. And then the cry dissolved into a hiccup, a single gasp of calm. But before Alistair could even release his breath, the frantic wailing began again, sharper, louder, more distraught. He turned away, jaw tight, eyes burning with shame. Beneath the moonlight pouring through the arched window, his shadow stretched across the floor, immense, unyielding, but clearly fractured down the center. The sound of his son's endless crying filled every crack. And that was when the truth hit him. Power was meaningless here. It was no defense against grief. By the arrival of dawn, the fortress was no longer a home. It was a prison of mournful echoes. The sun struggled over the ice-capped peaks, spilling pale gold through the high windows, but warmth refused to enter the Alpha's private chambers. The pup continued to cry. The sound had become a maddening pulse in Alistair's veins, an unrelenting rhythm of futility. Outside, the loyal guards exchanged worried glances. Inside, the once unflappable Alpha sat beside the ornate cradle, his eyes hollowed by a sleepless night. 3 hours, Alpha. Beta David murmured softly from the doorway. He has not ceased. Alistair did not look up. I am aware. Should I once again fetch the healers? They achieved nothing but a waste of air. There was a long pause, followed by a quiet sigh. Perhaps he yearns for her. The words were too painful. Alistair's jaw pulsed. Do not utter her name. David bowed his head and retreated without another word. The instant the door closed, Alistair let his carefully constructed mask shatter. His massive shoulders sagged, his hands shaking as he dragged them down his face. The air in the room was thick with a conflicting sense of spilled milk, hot tears, and cold sorrow. It smelled as if heartbreak had taken root in the very stone. He glanced at the empty rocking chair near the cradle, the place where Victoria had often sat, murmuring dreams of their future. Her memory still clung to these walls. He desperately needed silence, but silence remained unattainable. "Why can't you simply stop this?" he muttered, once more standing over the cradle. "You are meant to be powerful, my son, my heir." The baby's cry seemed to falter, as if answering his question, then swelled louder, in clear disagreement. Alistair spun away. His inner wolf stirred beneath his skin, pacing the confines of his soul. Power surged through him, demanding control, dominance. But over what? An infant. The alpha side of him raged. The father side of him was fracturing. And somewhere between these two warring realities, he heard something faint. A whisper just outside the chamber. A woman's voice, hesitant and low. "Has truly no one managed to help him?" He scowled, catching the subtle scent of cinnamon and kitchen soap. An omega scent. Likely a lowly scullery girl from the kitchens. What audacity brought her near his private wing? Before he could investigate, one of the guards hissed a warning. "Back away, girl. You risk your life if the alpha catches you here." Her voice trembled. "But he has been weeping for so many hours." Alistair's low growl silenced both of them. "Return to your duties," he thundered. The footsteps quickly retreated, but the scent lingered, soft, strangely familiar in a way he couldn't grasp. Still, he dismissed it. Omegas were beneath his notice. His world was structured on strength and legacy, not soft whispers and children's songs. Even so, her voice had momentarily pierced the noise like a momentary thread of peace. The baby whimpered once more. Alistair let out a slow, controlled breath, lowering himself beside the cradle again. He attempted to hum the gentle tune Victoria used to sing, but the melody cracked halfway through. The terrible truth was, he could not remember the full song anymore. And just like that, the tears returned, louder, stronger, almost pleading. Alistair's throat tightened painfully. For a brief, dizzying second, he thought he heard her voice again, soft and certain. "Perhaps he senses your sorrow." He closed his eyes. Impossible. Yet, as the painful minutes ticked by, that scent, cinnamon and soap, seemed to drift slightly closer again. Somewhere far below, in the scorching heat of the kitchens, an Omega girl wiped her wet hands on her apron, her heart thumping as the Alpha's latest roar shook the castle foundations. And though she knew it was sheer madness, she whispered to herself a silent promise. "If no one else aids that child, I will." That evening, the fortress became quiet, yet remained deeply unsettling. Snow began to fall outside, gentle yet relentless, coating the sharp spires of Ashworth in a perfect white armor. Inside, the standing torches burned low, casting elongated shadows that seemed to pulse with life. The pup was still crying, though his wails were weaker now, exhausted from the day's endless struggle. Alistair stood at the window, gazing out over the open courtyard where his warriors trained even under the moonlight. He envied their simple certainty, the clarity of a sword in hand, the straightforward nature of a command and its execution. Here, in this confined nursery, there were no easy victories, only persistent ghosts. As the silence deepened, he whispered to the cold glass, "What answer eludes me?" No response came, only that frail, broken sound from the cradle. He walked closer, dropping to one knee beside his son. The child's cheeks were flushed, his tiny chest rising and falling too rapidly. Alistair moved a finger near his arm, but quickly drew back before contact. His hands, the very hands that had ended wars, seemed far too monstrous for an act of tenderness. He needs his mother. The thought was a raw poison. He rose to his feet, pacing the cold stone floor. "You will learn resilience," he said quietly. "You will grow without the need for comfort. That is the true way of an alpha." But the words tasted hollow in his mouth. The child whimpered, as if in silent disagreement. That's when Alistair felt it. A momentary disturbance in the air, faint, yet utterly real. That same distinct scent again. Cinnamon and soap. It drifted through the slight crack of the ajar door. He spun around, sharply. Who is there? No one answered, only the swift, soft shuffle of fading footsteps. Alistair clenched his jaw, walking quickly to the door, but an invisible force held him back. The pup had momentarily quieted. For the first time in countless hours, there was silence. He turned back slowly. The child's silver eyes were half open, like moonlight on calm water. They seemed peaceful. Alistair stood frozen there, his heart thumping heavily. He did not comprehend it. But in that fragile moment, beneath the falling snow, the flickering firelight, and the phantom scent that was not his own, something deep inside him finally shifted. He realized the silence was not a sign of victory. It was a sign of caution. Because quiet in Ashworth Keep never lasted for long. And somewhere far below, an Omega girl had already sealed her destiny. The sound reached even the lowest kitchens. It rolled downward through thick stone chutes, vibrating through the pots and pans until the very spoons rattled in their containers. Eliza froze mid-stir, the ladle dripping rich stew back into the vat. The sound was more than simple noise. It was profound anguish. And though she attempted to resume stirring, her hands refused to obey. "Moon save us." "Not again," muttered Margaret, the formidable head cook, slamming her palm onto the wooden counter. 3 hours and counting. That child's desperate cry will surely drive the alpha mad. The other servants laughed nervously, trying hard not to show their fear. "Mad? He is already unhinged," one whispered. "He dismissed a healer last night for suggesting the pup missed its mother." Eliza winced. She knew the story. Everyone did. The Luna's tragic death was still discussed in hushed tones, how she had bled out beneath the cursed red moon, how the Alpha's howl had split the heavens. And now her child cried every night, still, Eliza found she could not ignore the sound. Every instinct within her, every fragile, trembling part of her Omega soul ached to go to him. "Stop staring at the ceiling, girl," Margaret snapped. "The Alpha does not need your pity. He requires obedience." "I wasn't," Eliza started, but the woman's icy glare silenced her instantly. "Wash the root vegetables. Keep your nose out of the Alpha's private affairs." "Yes, Margaret." Even so, her gaze lingered upward. The walls were immensely thick, but not dense enough to mute that desperate sound. At the far end of the kitchen, the other Omegas huddled near the scorching hearth, whispering darkly. "He is cursed," said one, a small woman with soot smeared on her cheek. The moon goddess took the Luna and deposited her sorrow into the child's lungs. "That is sacrilege," hissed another. "Hush, before someone informs on us." But Eliza remained still. She simply listened, her heart thudding in perfect sync with the pup's sobs. Something deep in her blood stirred, something ancient and primal. Her inner wolf pressed urgently against her chest. "Go to him." She shook her head sharply, whispering back, "I cannot." Yet, the agonizing ache did not subside. This sound was not ordinary. It was not merely an infant's complaint. It was a call. One that clawed deep into her very bones. "Why does it matter to you?" Margaret's voice sliced through her trance. "You imagine the Alpha would thank you if you went near his heir? He would have your head." Eliza's voice failed her. "He sounds terrified." That earned a bitter laugh from one of the dish girls. "An Alpha's pup. Terrified. They are born with fangs sharper than ours. Do not be naive." Perhaps they were correct. Perhaps she was foolish. But still, she could not unhear the agony. The powerful rhythm of sorrow that echoed like a shared heartbeat. Before she could restrain herself, she hummed a short, soft melody, wordless and half-forgotten, her own mother's lullaby. The other Omegas glanced over. One smiled faintly, but Margaret's hand slammed hard onto the work table. "No singing in my kitchen." Eliza instantly fell silent, but the lullaby continued to play inside her mind, quiet and relentlessly persistent. And though she returned to her chores, her thoughts remained fixed on the halls above, because of that sound, because of that child, because her instincts utterly refused to let her rest. What she did not know was that fate had already noted her hum, and the wheel had begun to turn. By the next morning, the fortress was buzzing with dark gossip. The Alpha had reportedly nearly destroyed the nursery in a fit of pure rage. The Beta had urgently summoned healers from 3 distant, rival packs. The child still cried. And now, the rumors claimed that anyone who failed to silence him would face permanent banishment. Eliza tried desperately to ignore it all, but fear spread like spilled ichor through the bustling kitchen. "Did you hear? He threatened the personal guards." Margaret hissed. "Said if his son doesn't find rest tonight, there will be a reckoning." "That cannot be true," someone muttered weakly. "Oh, it is true," Margaret said grimly. "And you, girl," she pointed a sharp finger at Eliza, "keep your mouth shut and your head down. The Alpha's vengeance is not a jest." "Yes, Margaret." Still, Eliza's heart hammered a frantic rhythm. Because the more they spoke of his terrifying wrath, the louder the baby's cry grew in her mind. High-pitched, sharp, unending. It was as if she could feel it vibrating through her very chest cavity. She tried scrubbing the heavy serving dishes, but her hands shook uncontrollably. She attempted to peel the massive sacks of vegetables, but her knife kept slipping. Everything around her blurred beneath the rhythm of that painful sound. "Eliza!" Margaret barked. "Concentrate." "I am sorry, but how could she possibly focus when every instinct screamed that the pup needed her? That something intangible was deeply wrong. That night, as the kitchen fires were banked, she lingered near the stone staircase that led up. The fortress above loomed like a dormant beast, vast, chilling, utterly forbidden. Omegas were strictly forbidden from ascending past the servants' floor. Still, she looked up. "You are not contemplating what I fear you are contemplating," whispered a stable hand behind her. Eliza jumped. "What?" "You keep gazing up there every time the pup wails." "Don't. You will get yourself executed." "I wouldn't," but her voice was a fragile thread because she would, and deep down, she already knew it. The man sighed. "You are far too gentle, Eliza. The world does not reward softness." He turned and left, but she remained standing there long after his footsteps faded, her eyes tracing the upward spiral of the stairs. The sound drifted down again, thin, wavering, and weak now. Something inside her snapped. Because it wasn't just the pup she heard anymore. It was the memory of the Luna, the echo of her own mother's song, every single heartbeat of loss that had ever whispered through the moon goddess's children. And the longer she listened, the clearer the certainty became. If no one went to him, he would cry until his precious voice gave out, because he was not crying from a need for sustenance. He was crying from pure loneliness, and perhaps, just perhaps, from overwhelming grief. The Alpha's final roar ripped through the fortress just before the stroke of midnight, a sound that tore through cold stone and warm flesh alike. Eliza dropped the stack of clean plates she was carrying. They shattered across the tile floor, but no one screamed. No one moved. The servants froze, pale and shaking. Again, someone whispered in fear. "Worse," said Margaret grimly. "He is utterly losing control." The pup's desperate cries joined the Alpha's ferocious rage, 2 distinct howls merging into one terrifying storm of sound. Eliza's heart pounded a furious tattoo. She did not even realize she was moving until she was standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, her apron clutched tightly in one hand. The other Omegas stared in complete horror. "Don't," Margaret hissed. "He will destroy you." "I cannot stay here," Eliza whispered back. But she was already climbing. The polished marble steps were freezing beneath her bare feet, each one gleaming faintly under the torchlight. With every step, the cry grew louder, more piercing, more desperate, like a frantic heartbeat against her skull. By the time she reached the upper landing, her entire body was shaking. Guards stood posted along the corridor ahead, their faces hardened and grim. "You are forbidden to be here," one warned immediately. "I just want to help," she said softly. "Please, he needs help." He barked a cold, bitter laugh. "Help an Alpha's heir? You are an Omega. Touch him, and you will die." She met his gaze, her own eyes steady. "Then allow me to die trying." Before they could react, She slipped past them, her heart hammering wildly. The corridors stretched long and silver, lined with the massive banners bearing the crest of the Ashworth pack, the same crest she had scrubbed 1,000 times from the kitchen crockery. Yet up close it looked different. Heavy. Sacred. As she neared the immense double doors of the nursery, the sound struck her with full force, a raw, agonized cry that rattled her bones. Her deepest instincts surged forward. Her inner wolf pressed to the surface, fierce and profoundly maternal. Without a single thought, she pushed the heavy door open. Inside, sheer chaos reigned. Servants scattered like startled sparrows. The Alpha stood in the center, his face shadowed, his eyes blazing a molten gold. The child wailed wildly in his arms, tiny body rigid with exhaustion. For one suspended moment, time stopped. Every single gaze in the room swung toward her. Every breath stilled. Eliza did not know what frightened her more, the immediate, profound silence or the blinding fire in his eyes. But her voice did not shake when she whispered, "Alpha, permit me to try." The sound struck her first, low, guttural, and absolutely feral. It was not the pup's cry this time. It was his. Alpha Alistair's roar cracked through the majestic grand hall like lightning tearing through granite. Servants dropped instantly to their knees. Guards snapped to attention. Even the fire in the sconces shuddered, the flames bowing low. The pup screamed louder still, a fragile, terrified echo tangled within his father's tempestuous rage. Eliza froze in the doorway, her breath locked in her throat. The very atmosphere seemed to bend beneath the Alpha's sheer power. It pressed against her chest, hot and overwhelming, like massive, unseen hands warning her to flee. But she didn't. She couldn't. Her bare feet moved on their own volition, one tentative step, then another, while the polished marble floor reflected her small, trembling frame. Every inch she gained felt like an unforgivable trespass. At the far end, Alistair stood before the colossal throne, his cloak a shade darker than night, his eyes burning with an intense, molten gold. His son squirmed frantically in his arms, tiny fists clenched, his face a painful shade of crimson. The Alpha's jaw clenched as he snarled at his terrified staff. 3 hours, his voice boomed. 3 hours and none of you can silence him. We tried, Alpha, whimpered the head healer. He absolutely will not rest. Then he will learn submission. Alistair barked, his fangs flashing in the torchlight. Even heirs must obey their Alpha. A wave of sharp gasps swept through the room, but what truly terrified them was not the words. It was the devastating break in his tone, because profound grief sounded dangerously close to pure fury. He is breaking, Eliza thought, her heart hammering. Before she could stop herself, the grand door creaked faintly behind her. All eyes swung her way. An Omega, covered faintly in flour and kitchen ash, stood exactly where no Omega should ever dare to stand. The guard nearest her stiffened. The betas began to whisper urgently. Someone hissed, "Remove her," yet she held her ground. Her voice came soft, wavering, yet it cut through the oppressive tension. "Alpha." Alistair spun around, and for a suspended moment, she saw the storm at his core, a man woven from absolute power and utter ruin. "Who are you?" he demanded, the demand itself a threat. "I am Eliza," she whispered. "From the kitchens. You dare enter this private hall?" His deep growl rolled through the air, vibrating in her ribs. The pup wailed even harder, and something in her snapped. Before rational thought could intervene, she spoke the words that sealed her fate. "Then let me help." The hall dissolved into silence. Not a single soul inhaled. The Alpha's terrifying gaze locked onto her, a predator studying its prey. Eliza's legs nearly failed her, but her inner wolf surged forward, whispering through the primal bond of instinct. "Do not look away." So she didn't. "I beg your forgiveness, Alpha," she said softly. "But he is in agony. Let me try." Shocked gasps rippled across the court. One beta immediately stepped forward, his voice sharp and condemnatory. "She cannot." It is strictly forbidden for an Omega to even touch royal blood. Another added, she will contaminate the heir's scent. Eliza's pulse raced, but she lifted her chin with forced defiance. Then banish me when this is over. Just let me try before he breaks completely. Alistair's growl deepened ominously. You believe my son to be weak? I believe he is lonely, she countered, a truth that surprised even herself. He senses your intense anger. For a heartbeat, the Alpha remained utterly motionless. His chest rose once, twice, and the fury in his eyes flickered. A crushing exhaustion began to creep in where the rage had been. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. If you fail, the consequences are severe. I understand, she said, without another word of argument. She stepped closer. The crowd instinctively parted, a mixture of fear and profound disbelief following her shadow. The distance between them vanished, one trembling breath at a time. When she finally reached the throne platform, she stopped. Her eyes immediately dropped to the tormented child in his arms. His tiny face was flushed, his breaths ragged and shallow. She raised her hands slowly, palms open. May I? Alistair hesitated. The vast hall waited. The pup screamed one final, desperate time, and then the Alpha released him. The child slid into her arms, weightless, yet heavy with the sheer power of every focused gaze upon them. The instant her warm skin brushed his, an inexplicable current surged through her veins. Her inner wolf awoke with a sudden gasp inside her, whispering, "Moon above. He is so fragile." She rocked him instinctively, the way her mother had done for her when tempests raged over their poor, forgotten village. The room around her blurred. She saw only the child. Her lips parted, and before fear could silence her, she began to hum. It was barely audible at first, just breath, air, and a barely perceptible, trembling melody. But then, as if summoned by an invisible force, the song found its form. A lunar lullaby, ancient, sacred, and nearly forgotten by the modern pack. The soft notes drifted through the chamber like strands of silver light. They wove around the huge pillars, floated past the dying firelight, and softened even the terrifying cadence of the Alpha's breathing. Eliza swayed gently, her voice rising and falling with the child's shallow, rapid breaths. The melody was not magic, not in the way spells were cast, but it carried something far older. The steady, comforting pulse of wolves sleeping under the full moon. The deep ache of mothers who had sung through their deepest loss. The simple promise that no cry went truly unheard. And in that moment, the pup stopped. His tiny body stilled. His eyelids fluttered closed. A soft sigh escaped his lips. The very first sound of peace the castle had heard since the Luna's sudden death. The silence that followed was not empty. It was holy. The court stared, eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Alistair's hands hung uselessly at his sides, his expression a mixture of profound awe and cold denial. The terrifying gold in his eyes faded to a soft, vulnerable silver, the color of true surrender. The baby cooed once, small and utterly content, nuzzling into Eliza's arm. She looked down, her vision blurred by tears. He is safe. He's quiet, someone whispered. The Omega did it. Another gasped. Impossible. The head healer dropped instantly to his knees. By the moon. Alistair silenced them all with a single, sharp glance, but his own voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. What did you do? Eliza knelt, still cradling the child. Nothing, Alpha. I only sang. She looked up at him. He wasn't hungry. He was not cursed. He was lonely. Her simple words hung in the vaulted chamber. Lonely. The Alpha swallowed hard, his throat tight with unreleased emotion. He felt me? Yes, she whispered. He cries because your heart does. The silence stretched deep, profound, and raw. Even the fire crackled quietly, as if afraid to intrude. Alistair looked at her then, not as a servant, not as an Omega, but as something else entirely. Someone who had walked through every law and reached his son when he himself could not. For the first time in years, the mighty Alpha of Ashworth bowed his head, and the fortress that had known only perpetual grief finally allowed itself a single, deep breath. It settled upon them like a fresh snowfall, soft, complete, and utterly unimaginable. The pup was no longer crying. He was sleeping, soundly, in the arms of an Omega. For a timeless moment, no one dared to move a muscle. The court's disbelief bordered on true fear. Every single law, every sacred tradition carved into the Ashworth stone, had been shattered by a single act of defiance wrapped in a lullaby. Eliza remained kneeling, her breath unsteady, her arms still protectively cradling the heir as if the world might snatch him back at any moment. Her heart hammered wildly, yet she dared not lift her gaze. By the moon, someone breathed. The Beta commander turned quickly to the Alpha, his eyes wide with desperate urgency. "My lord, this absolutely cannot be permitted." "Quiet," Alistair commanded. His tone was not loud, but it carried enough quiet weight to crush the entire room into silence. His gaze remained fixed on the small girl before him. The warm, clean scent of her, like sweet earth and cool rain, filled the space between them, strangely softening the hard edges of his grief. His son slept safely in her arms, without fear, without pain, without him.
How?
He was the North's Alpha. His decree was law. His will was unbreakable. And yet, one fragile, trembling Omega had undone him with nothing but a simple song. A tremor of something, rage, or perhaps awe, ran through him. "Rise," he ordered. Eliza stood slowly, holding the child protectively to her chest. Her knees felt weak. Every noble in the hall stared openly, their eyes widened with disbelief and horror. The Beta commander stepped forward again, desperation in his voice. "Alpha, she violated the sacred law of rank. She touched royal blood without explicit permission. She must be punished." Alistair turned his head slightly. "Would you truly prefer the heir to still weep?" The Beta's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Alistair took one slow step closer, the echo of his massive boot rolling through the chamber. He stopped only a breath away from her. His golden eyes caught the firelight, the amber edges now glowing intensely. "What exactly did you do to my son?" he asked quietly. Her lips trembled, but her voice was firm. "I sang to him, my lord. That is all. That is my only skill." The sheer simplicity of the reply struck him harder than any confession. Alistair's inner wolf stirred restlessly. He yearned to call it manipulation, coincidence, or even sorcery, anything but what it truly was: compassion. Yet, when he looked at the pup in her arms, small and perfectly peaceful, his own heart stuttered. The impossible had occurred right before his eyes, and for the first time in years, he had no command left to give. The council chamber still reeked of shock when Alistair finally dismissed the court. One by one, the nobles and guards bowed out, whispering prayers to the moon goddess, crossing themselves as they passed the Omega girl who had somehow silenced the Alpha's heir. Only Eliza remained, kneeling once more before the massive throne, the baby sleeping quietly and soundly in her arms. The firelight made her simple hair gleam a deep copper gold. Alistair descended from the platform, his heavy footsteps measured. The sheer heat of his presence reached her before his shadow did. He stopped a few feet away. "Look at me." She hesitated, then slowly lifted her gaze. Her eyes, soft and completely unguarded, met his own. "Explain yourself," he demanded. "I cannot explain what is beyond my understanding," she murmured. "But I know what I felt." "And what did you feel?" His tone was sharp, but a deep curiosity burned beneath it. She swallowed hard. He was not hungry, Alpha. He was not physically ill. He was grieving. The word struck him like a physical blow. "Grieving." She nodded. "He senses your profound grief. The bond between Alpha and heir is powerful, stronger than most blood ties. He cries because your heart does." Her simple words hung in the vaulted chamber. "Lonely." The Alpha swallowed hard, his throat tight with unreleased emotion. "He felt me?" "Yes," she whispered. He cries because your heart does. The silence stretched deep, profound, and raw. Even the fire crackled quietly, as if afraid to intrude. Alistair looked at her then, not as a servant, not as an Omega, but as something else entirely. Someone who had walked through every law and reached his son when he himself could not. For the first time in years, the mighty Alpha of Ashworth bowed his head, and the fortress that had known only perpetual grief finally allowed itself a single, deep breath. He found solace that night. The entire castle slept soundly for the first time in months. Snow continued to drift against the high window panes. The torches burned low, their light soft and golden. Alistair stood by the cradle, his arms crossed, watching his son sleep in the deep silence Eliza had left behind. He had not truly dismissed her, only sent her back to the servants' quarters with explicit orders for rest. But her faint scent still lingered here, ethereal as moonlight, a mixture of warm wild flowers and comforting warmth. The Alpha leaned forward, gently brushing a stray lock of silvery hair from his child's delicate forehead. "You were crying for her," he murmured, "and I was too blind and stubborn to see it." The baby sighed contentedly in his sleep. Alistair straightened up, exhaling slowly. He turned toward the window, his haggard reflection framed in the glass. Gold eyes dulled with deep exhaustion. The slightest, most subtle cracks of something human showing through the warrior's mask. The immense weight he'd carried for months seemed to shift perceptibly. Not fully lifted, but simply moved like a mountain learning how to draw breath again. As he stood there, he felt the sharp sting before he registered what it was. A tear, just a single one. He caught it with his thumb, immediately angry at his weakness, but the warmth of it spread through his chest before he could fully suppress it. Outside, the moon shone high and full, silver and perfectly still. For a profound moment, it seemed to watch him, perhaps to judge him, or even to forgive him. "Don't look at me that way," he whispered roughly to the night sky. "You sent her, didn't you?" He did not expect a reply, but in the quiet that followed, a very faint humming echoed down the corridor, a gentle lullaby drifting faintly from the far-off servants' quarters. He closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. And though the mighty Alpha of the North would never once admit it aloud, he wept. By the first light of dawn, the fortress no longer belonged to silence. It belonged entirely to whispers. They darted through the cold corridors like luminous fireflies, glowing brighter and more dangerous with every excited retelling. The Omega silenced the air. She dared to physically touch him. They say the Alpha chose not to punish her. Even the thick stone walls seemed to lean in to listen. Eliza kept her head bowed as she scrubbed the flagstones just outside the kitchens, but her name followed her like a plume of smoke. The other servants now avoided her, not out of hatred, but out of a paralyzing fear. No one wished to stand too close to a girl the Alpha had publicly spared. "Eliza!" She jumped, startled. Margaret stood behind her, her face pale, her voice thin and unnatural. "You are requested in the Great Hall. Now." Eliza's hands froze around the scrubbing cloth. "Now." Margaret nodded once, grimly. "The Alpha himself has called for you." The entire kitchen fell silent. Every head turned. One of the younger girls whispered, "Don't go." Another muttered, "If he doesn't execute her, he will surely claim her." Eliza tried desperately not to listen. Her heart pounded so fiercely she worried they might hear it echo through the floor. "What is his desire?" Margaret only shook her head, unable to meet her eyes. "If I knew, I would tell you to run." But she did not run, because deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the uncontrollable trembling, something far stronger stirred. The same unwavering instinct that had guided her to that weeping child last night whispered again, "Go." As she slowly ascended the marble staircase, the air seemed heavier, thick with both judgment and profound awe. The imposing castle guards opened the massive Great Hall doors, and she stepped into the immense chamber where the Alpha and his entire council waited. Every noble eye fixed on her small form. Every heartbeat in the room slowed. Alistair Vance stood before his throne, his cloak draped across his formidable shoulders, the morning light spilling over him like liquid armor. His gaze found her instantly and did not waver. "Eliza," he said. Her knees almost buckled upon hearing her name spoken on his tongue. The council chamber felt like a powerful storm contained within solid stone. Betas lined the walls, their expressions sharp with evident disapproval. Nobles stood whispering darkly in the corners, the sound like dry, rustling leaves. Only Alistair stood still, calm, unreadable, the terrifying eye of the storm. "Bring her forward," he commanded. Eliza stepped closer, each movement painfully deliberate, her palms slick against the fabric of her skirt. The child's lullaby still hummed faintly in her chest, echoing through the core of her being. The Beta commander bowed low, his voice trembling slightly. "Alpha, forgive my intrusion, but she flagrantly defied every law. The punishment for her offense must be severe." "The punishment for her offense is mine to decide," Alistair interrupted, his voice cutting like a whip. The man visibly flinched and fell immediately silent. Alistair's gaze drifted back to Eliza. "You entered my private hall without permission. You touched my son. You broke the most sacred rule in Ashworth history." She bowed her head low. "Yes, Alpha." "Then tell me," he said, his voice dropping now to a dangerous register. "Why should I not punish you?" Her answer came soft but unwavering. "Because I did not do it to defy your will. I did it to save his life." The words were simple, yet they struck the gathered crowd like a clap of thunder. One of the nobles scoffed loudly. "An Omega claiming righteousness. You grant them mercy. They will soon believe themselves our equals." Alistair's golden eyes snapped toward him, and the man's contemptuous voice died instantly in his throat. The Alpha turned back to her. "You would willingly risk death for him?" "I would risk anything," she said. "No child should ever weep alone." A deep silence followed. It was not born of fear this time, but of awe. Alistair exhaled slowly, as if releasing a burden he'd carried for far too long. Then he turned fully toward his entire council. "She will not be punished." The ensuing uproar was instant and deafening. Shouts of disbelief, sharp hisses of outrage, the sounds of wolves barely managing to hold their human forms. "Alpha, this completely defies the pack order," one cried. "The others will rebel." "Then let them rebel." His voice cracked like a whip. When the hall finally settled into a stunned silence again, Alistair slowly extended a hand toward Eliza. "Eliza of no house," he declared, "is hereby named guardian of the heir. Her life will be fiercely protected, as surely as his own. Any who dare to harm her will answer directly to me." Gasps filled the chamber. Several noble women clasped their hands to their chests. The Beta commander looked faint. Alistair's gaze hardened. She succeeded where bloodlines failed. Let her rank from this day be defined by worth, not by birthright. Eliza's breath hitched. "Alpha." But he was not yet finished. "You will reside within the nursery quarters, close to my son. You will answer only and exclusively to me." That last clause hung heavier than the rest. Her pulse skipped. The council's stunned silence deepened further. When she finally located her voice, it came out as a bare whisper. "I serve at your command." And when her eyes met his, something profound and unspoken passed between them, something that had nothing to do with duty at all. By nightfall, every single candle in the fortress burned lower than usual. Whispers crawled through the vast halls, softer now, but no less perilous. "She lives with the heir. The Alpha truly trusts her. He looks at her strangely." Eliza heard it all. The nursery was utterly quiet, the pup sleeping peacefully in his new cradle. She sat beside him, watching the faint, steady rise and fall of his chest. Every few moments, she would hum under her breath, a sound too soft for anyone else to perceive. At the doorway, two massive guards stood stationed, by the explicit order of the Alpha himself. Their confused expressions betrayed more confusion than hostility. No one quite knew how to categorize or react to her. She still couldn't fully process it herself. Only yesterday, she had been a nameless kitchen servant. Now, the entire fortress bowed, without meeting her eyes. Fear itself had drastically changed its shape. It no longer stemmed from the threat of execution. It came from her sudden, terrifying importance. Because the higher she was elevated, the further and more devastating her potential fall. "Does he still sleep?" The deep, resonant voice rolled through the quiet air. She spun around sharply. Alistair stood framed in the doorway, his cloak loose, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Alpha," she murmured, rising quickly. His gaze flicked to the child, then returned to her. "He does not cry in your presence," Alistair said softly, almost to himself. "Not even once." Eliza swallowed. Perhaps he feels secure. His eyes lifted to hers, golden and questioning. "And you? Do you feel secure here?" The question caught her completely off guard. "Should I not?" "That depends," he said, his voice lowering, "on whether you trust the one guarding you." Her pulse fluttered wildly. "Do you mean yourself?" He allowed himself a faint smile, more shadow than warmth. "There is no one else I would trust him with. Or you." The words hung heavy and thick between them, charged with something neither dared to name. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, carrying the faint, distant howl of unseen wolves. Alistair turned toward the cradle, his large hand resting on the intricately carved edge. The moonlight painted silver across his strong, dark hair. Eliza watched him silently. The proud, untouchable Alpha looked almost utterly human in that simple light. "Rest," he said finally, his tone suddenly gentle. "You have accomplished enough for one lifetime." She bowed her head. "Yes, Alpha." But as he turned to depart, her voice slipped out, barely audible, trembling with need. "Why me?" He paused, without turning, and offered his final answer. "Because when every other soul heard a cry, you heard a heart." Then he was gone. Eliza stood alone in the quiet nursery, the moonlight spilling like silver silk across her trembling hands. The pup sighed deeply in his sleep. And though she could not explain why, her own eyes stung with unshed tears, because something deep inside her whispered that this sudden, impossible peace would not endure. That love in a fortress built entirely on raw power was the most perilous thing of all. The storm came without warning. Lightning ripped open the sky, flashing white across the towers of Ashworth Keep. Thunder followed, shaking the walls until dust rained from the rafters. Eliza woke to the pup's cry, thin, weak, and unfamiliar. It wasn't the loud wail of hunger. It was softer, rasping, frightened. She rushed to the cradle. The child's skin was burning hot, his breath shallow. Sweat glistened across his tiny forehead. "No, no," she whispered, pressing a hand to his chest. His heartbeat fluttered like a trapped bird. Within moments, the healers filled the room. Herbs, ointments, spells whispered under trembling breaths. None of it worked. "The fever worsens," cried the eldest healer. "It's beyond mortal cure." Alistair stormed into the nursery, cloak drenched from rain. "What happened?" "My lord," the healer stammered. "We've done all we can." The Alpha's eyes went wild. "You call this all?" He slammed a hand against the wall, the thunder outside echoing his rage. "He's my heir." The healers fell silent. Fear swallowed the air. Eliza clutched the child close, tears streaking her cheeks. "Please," she whispered to the infant. "Hold on." The wind howled through the broken shutters. Candle flames sputtered and died. For an instant, only lightning lit the room. Blue, white, ghostly, merciless. Then the pup's cry faded. "Do something," Alistair shouted, but no one moved. No one dared. Eliza's voice cracked as she cried. "The moon will hear me." Every head turned toward her. "What did you say?" Alistair demanded. She met his eyes, trembling but unbroken. "The moon hears the cries of wolves when men fail them." Before anyone could stop her, she laid the child on a silver-lined cloth by the window. Moonlight spilled across his body like a blessing waiting to be claimed. The storm outside raged like a beast denied. Eliza knelt beside the child, the window thrown open to the tempest. Rain lashed her face, mingling with tears as she began to sing. The same lullaby, but slower now, older. Each note vibrated with something more than sound. Magic stirred in the air, soft but deep. The heartbeat of the moon herself. "She's invoking the old rite," one healer gasped. "It's forbidden." Alistair stepped forward, torn between fury and desperation. "What are you doing?" Eliza didn't answer. Her voice rose, trembling as she cut her palm with a shard of silver glass. Blood welled crimson against the pale glow. Then, whispering through the wind, she said, "Moon above, mother of all wolves, bind my breath to his. Take from me what he needs to live." She pressed her hand to the child's chest. Her blood glimmered in the light, then spread, tracing glowing runes across the skin. The silver shimmered. The fever broke. Gasps filled the room. The healers fell to their knees. Alistair's wolf surged within him, half in awe, half in terror. "You're killing yourself," he shouted, lunging forward. Eliza's eyes flicked to his, calm, resigned. "Then let my death be his tomorrow." Her body trembled. The wind roared louder, pulling strands of her hair into the moonlight. Her song faltered, then steadied again. When the lightning struck, it didn't hit the castle. It hit the sky itself, a column of light connecting heaven and earth. And for one sacred heartbeat, the Alpha, the Omega, and the heir were bound by the same pulse. The pup's cry returned, soft, alive, steady. Eliza smiled faintly. Then everything went dark. "Eliza!" Her name tore from his throat. Alistair caught her just before she hit the floor. Her body limp, her skin cold, her blood stained his hands crimson. The healers scrambled forward, but he waved them away. "Don't touch her." He cradled her close, the pup sleeping safely in the cradle behind them. "You saved him again," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You foolish, fearless girl." Her eyelids fluttered weakly. "Is he alive?" "Yes," he breathed. "Because of you." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then it was worth it." Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath shallow but steady. Alistair's world tilted. The storm outside softened, the thunder fading to a distant murmur. The moonlight that had burned so bright now glowed gently, washing over them in silver peace. He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering words no one had ever heard from the Alpha of the North. "You saved my blood, my air, my heart." Tears slid down his cheeks, unhidden this time. "Even the gods should bow to you." The healers, watching in silence, would later swear the moonlight brightened at those words, as if the goddess herself had accepted his vow. For that single night, the castle forgot rank, law, and lineage. It remembered only a song, and the girl who sang life back into a dying child. The first dawn after the storm broke soft and golden. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, brushing over the marble floors like forgiveness made light. The castle woke to quiet awe. No one spoke of miracles aloud, but every servant knew the truth. The Omega girl had saved the heir again. When Alistair entered the great hall that morning, the court gathered instinctively. Their eyes flicked toward him, then toward the fragile figure behind, Eliza, pale but standing. She wore no jewels, no rank insignia, only a plain gray gown, the hem damp from the courtyard dew. Yet the entire chamber seemed to bow without command. Alistair took the dais, voice echoing through the still air.
"Hear me," he said.
"The pup of Ashworth lives." A murmur rippled through the hall, gratitude, disbelief, wonder. "And he lives," Alistair continued. "Because of her." Eliza lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. The Alpha stepped aside, extending his hand toward her. "Eliza of no house," he declared, "is hereby named guardian of the heir. Her life will be protected as fiercely as his own. Any who harm her will answer to me." Gasps filled the chamber. Several nobles stepped forward, protesting under their breath. "Alpha, she's an Omega. The pack will revolt." "Then let them revolt," Alistair said evenly. "Their howls will die before mine does." The words carried the weight of thunder. The hall went silent, and in that silence, something ancient shifted. The hierarchy that had ruled for generations trembled, not from rebellion, but reverence. When the crowd dispersed, Eliza stood alone by the window, the pup asleep in her arms. The world beyond the glass shimmered with sunlight. She whispered to the child, "You've given me a name." Behind her, Alistair's voice answered quietly and purpose. Days passed like pages turning in a quiet book. The fever never returned. The pup thrived, laughing, reaching, cooing whenever Eliza entered the room. The once haunted castle now breathed warmth again. Yet it wasn't only the child who healed. Alistair found himself drawn again and again to the sound of her voice. It carried peace into places inside him he had long sealed shut. One evening, he lingered in the doorway as she sang the moon's song softly, the air asleep against her shoulder. The fire cast gold halos around them both. "You've given him peace," he murmured, stepping forward. She turned, startled, but didn't bow. "He deserves it." Alistair's gaze softened.
"And me?"
"You've given me something I cannot name." She hesitated. "I have given nothing, Alpha. Only done what was right." "That is precisely what I've forgotten how to do," he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavy, personal. He walked closer until the firelight blurred between them. "When I lost the Luna, I thought I'd buried every gentle thing inside me. But when you touched my son, something in me remembered how to feel." Her breath caught. "You should not say such things." "Why?" he asked. "Because people will talk." "They already do," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Eliza looked away, her voice trembling. "You are Alpha. I am Omega. Between us stands a world." He tilted his head. "Then perhaps it's time the world moved." Her heart stuttered. "Don't, please. Eliza." His voice was rough now, the edge of restraint visible even through the quiet. "I owe you everything, but what I feel—" "Stop," she whispered. "If you speak it, I cannot unhear it." For a long moment, only the fire crackled. Then Alistair stepped back, his composure returning like armor sliding into place. "Very well," he said. "Then hear this instead. No harm will ever touch you again. That is my vow." She bowed her head, but her heart betrayed her with a tremor of longing she couldn't hide. The moon returned to fullness a week later. The castle glowed in her light, silver washing over the ramparts, spilling through the nursery windows. Eliza sat by the cradle, humming as the pup slept. Alistair stood in the doorway again, silent, watching, the wolf in him restless. He shouldn't have been there, but he couldn't stay away. Her song wove through the air like silk, gentle, luminous, dangerous. Each note seemed to pull at something deeper inside him, something primal. When she noticed him, her voice faltered. "You shouldn't linger here, my lord." "And yet I do." His footsteps were soft as he approached. The firelight flickered against the edges of his jaw, tracing the scars she'd never noticed before. "You sing to the moon as if she listens," he said. "She always listens," Eliza replied quietly, "even to those who shouldn't speak." Their eyes met. The world seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment neither moved. Then the pup shifted in his sleep, reaching a tiny hand toward the air. Eliza leaned forward to adjust his blanket, and Alistair's fingers brushed hers. It was a fleeting touch, accidental, harmless, and yet the bond between them flared like starlight in their veins. Eliza froze, her breath catching. Alistair's pulse thundered in his ears. She withdrew her hand as though burned. "You can't," she whispered. "I know, but you want to." He said nothing. Silence was his answer. The pup sighed softly, curling into peaceful dreams. Eliza turned away, clutching the edge of the cradle for strength. "If this continues, they'll call me a curse." Alistair's voice came low, rough and final. "Then let them. I've lived under curses before, but never something this worth the risk." The moonlight brightened, spilling silver fire across their faces. Two souls caught between duty and desire, standing on the edge of ruin and rebirth. And somewhere deep within, the goddess herself smiled. The castle that once echoed with wails now breathed peace. Where once there were rumors of scandal, now there were whispers of miracle. Servants no longer spoke Eliza's name in fear, but in reverence. The Omega, who had silenced the heir, had also silenced the Alpha's grief. The pup grew stronger by the day, laughing easily, sleeping deeply. The healers called it divine intervention. The guards called it witchcraft. But those who had seen the truth in the Alpha's eyes knew better, because the Alpha himself had changed. Alistair walked through the halls no longer as a storm, but as the calm that follows one. His voice, once an instrument of command, had softened. His gaze, once sharp as steel, now carried warmth, the kind that frightened him more than any battle ever had. Each morning he would find himself standing quietly by the nursery door, watching Eliza cradle his son. Her hair caught the dawn like strands of spun gold. Her hum the only sound the boy needed to smile. Even the council noticed. They didn't dare speak of it aloud, but the air between them carried unspoken understanding. Power had shifted, not through conquest but compassion. And though no one said it, everyone knew. The Ashworth pack was changing. Not because of the Alpha's strength, but because of the Omega's heart. That night, the moon rose high, round and radiant, draped in silver mist. The castle slept beneath her glow, silver washing over the ramparts, spilling through the nursery windows. Eliza stood by the open window, the heir asleep in her arms. The child's little hand curled around her finger as she began to sing. The melody floated through the air, gentle as breath. It drifted past the stone arches, across the courtyard into the cold night where wolves howled in distant harmony. Alistair, walking the ramparts below, stopped in his tracks. The sound reached him like a memory, that same lullaby, the song that had once silenced his son, that had once stilled his rage, that had once pulled him back from the edge of despair. He closed his eyes and listened. Each note felt like a confession he could never speak. Every wordless hum held the tenderness he was too proud to show. As he stood beneath the window, moonlight poured over him, and for the first time in years, the Alpha bowed his head. Not in defeat, but in devotion. He realized then that command could inspire obedience, but only love could inspire loyalty. When the song ended, he whispered into the night, "If the moon herself envies you, I would not blame her." Unseen above, Eliza paused as if she'd heard his heart instead of his voice. The air stirred in her arms and smiled in his sleep. And somewhere between their heartbeats, the old world broke and a new one was born. Days passed. The stormy season ended. Spring returned in full glory to Ashworth, painting the massive hills in vibrant green and gold. In the courtyard, a high, soft, innocent sound of laughter rang out. The heir toddled across the grass, his little feet determined but unsteady. Eliza followed closely, her own gentle laughter mingling perfectly with his. Alistair stood silently by the archway, watching the simple scene. His heart was too full for any spoken words. Once, this courtyard had been his battlefield, a place solely for drills and discipline. Now it was his peace. Eliza looked up and caught his eye. The smile that met his was small, yet it reached every corner of her eyes. For a perfect, suspended heartbeat, the world shrank to the small space between them. He crossed the courtyard slowly, deliberately. When he reached her, he stopped just close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what, Alpha?" "For everything I did not know I had lost." She blinked, emotion shimmering in her eyes. "You didn't lose it. You simply forgot how to truly see it." He looked down at his son, then back to her. "And you reminded me." The wind carried the scent of rain and strong pine. The wolves beyond the fortress walls howled, not in mourning, but in quiet, harmonious song. Alistair lifted his gaze to the horizon, where the moon was rising, pale and ethereal against the fading dusk. The child stopped crying, he murmured, almost to himself. Eliza tilted her head, confused. "What was that?" He smiled faintly, his voice breaking into something raw, something utterly human. But the wolf inside me finally learned how to feel. Eliza's breath caught, not from surprise, but from the simple, profound truth of it. The moonlight wrapped them both in a gentle, silver calm, the air between them, living proof that love, in any unexpected form, defies all rank, rule, and rigid reason. And as the night fully settled over Ashworth Keep, the improbable legend of the Omega and the Alpha's heir became more than a story. It became the beautiful song of a new, unforeseen era, a song that began with a desperate cry and ended with a single, powerful heartbeat. Thank you so much for listening. If you love this story, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more werewolf romance story. Let me know in the comments what you think about this story.
See you next time.